It is Thursday, the 5th of April, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So I went to Stratford.
You went to Stratford?
You did.
I went to Stratford.
Yeah.
Stratford-on-Avon.
I've never been, which is embarrassing, having an English degree and being a Shakespeare fan and not having been to Stratford.
Not having gone down to see where the bard is.
I think I went once, but I think I was about 8 or 9 years old and I don't remember anything about it other than we went.
Good.
It's actually the third time I've been to Stratford, but the first time I've been to Stratford to go to Stratford.
Right.
Once I was at Stratford Racecourse because I was there for work.
Gotcha.
Another time I was there for a work retreat, so we just never left the confines of the spa hotel that we were in because it was a work thing. So this time I was there to
knock about.
For Stratford. I was actually there for Lana's birthday. So we went down to Stratford. And Stratford I found was a weird place because it was like motorway, all the way down.
Yeah.
This is the junction. Country road, bang, city centre. Whoa! What's suddenly on a one-way system?
Yeah,
it's like you get north to the middle of town in no time at all. It's kind of ridiculous. But everywhere is obviously like very small roads, one-way systems, little tiny thing, and everything is Shakespeare branded.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah,
everything is Shakespeare. Like the cab companies, they're all called Ophelia Cabs.
Nice,
and things like that. They're all kind of Shakespeare branded. The hotel we stayed in, all the rooms, it's like this is the Macbeth room, this is the Othello room, and as you stay in this hotel. So we went down there and we went to see some Shakespeare at the RSC.
Oh, really? What did you go and see?
Which is good. We went to see Macbeth.
Nice, with Christopher Eccleston.
With Christopher Eccleston, which is mostly how Lana persuaded me to go. Do you want to go see some Shakespeare? With Christopher Eccleston? Yeah, all right then.
Yeah, nice.
Which is good because I've never. It's a stretch to say I've now met Christopher Eccleston. I've now been within 20 feet of Christopher Eccleston, which is...
You were 20 foot away. Was it front row?
If you'd have had a photo taken with him, it would have cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, I've seen everyone complaining about that.
About how much he's going to a Comic-Con and he's charging a lot of money for like £75 for a photo with him and £85 for a signature. Something
Jesus.
Like much more than any of the other doctors are charging.
Is
it because he's like, I'm a proper actor. I don't want to be here. I'm an actual actor. I'm in Shakespeare.
I think it's because he's never done Doctor Who conventions before. He's always been very, very wary of them.
He's weirdly kind of like quiet and stuff, isn't he?
He's a very shy, very private.
Like a Tesco value Daniel Day-Lewis.
Quite an insecure man. In a lot of ways, I think, as well.
What makes you say that?
Those are his words, not mine. Like, so one of the things he's recently come out and talked about when he was on Doctor Who, one of the reasons he had a big falling out with the production team, and why he left after one series, he says was partly he had a big falling out with the production team, and partly his own insecurity, basically sitting there thinking, I'm not up to this role. I do gritty northern acting, and playing the Doctor's got quite a bit of light comedy in it. And you have to do the righteous anger, the shouting at the Daleks kind of stuff, but you also have to do the quite lightweight fluffy stuff.
Yeah.
And he felt massively insecure about doing the lightweight fluffy stuff. I can't do that. That's not me. That's not the kind of actor.
Was he all right though? He's pretty decent at it.
He was fucking good.
Yeah.
Which is why it's just insecure. It's not that he is incapable. It's just insecurity.
Was he above
part.
Smith? Above Tennant?
I will not be drawn on which is my favourite of the Doctors.
You don't rank the Doctors?
God, no.
You must rank the worst Doctor, though.
Nope.
Who's the most mediocre Doctor? Like the middle of the road Doctor? Like a bog standard unit of Doctor?
Love all of them. Every single one.
McGann
was brilliant. So we went down and we saw Christopher Eccleston in Macbeth, which was quite good.
Who else was in it?
Some other people. So,
Gotcha. Yep.
And I'd never seen Shakespeare live.
Oh, really?
Never seen Shakespeare perform. I've read some Shakespeare, not a lot of Shakespeare. I've read Romeo and Juliet. I've read Macbeth as well. But I've never actually seen Shakespeare performed.
Yeah.
So that was quite an experience as well to watch Shakespeare being performed by the Royal Shakespeare Company on stage, and the lead was Doctor Who. So I had a fucking whale of a time.
They're pretty decent, the Royal Shakespeare Company, although I'm pretty sure I saw them do a production of Othello at the Royal Theatre in Newcastle, and they played Iago for laughs, which has annoyed me ever fucking since, and I must have been about 16 or 15
Did they
at the
mistake
time.
it for the parrot out of Aladdin?
They did it in the voice of Gilbert Gottfried. They said some very offensive things, and they said, well, I'm just too edgy, and edgy is what it's all about these days, ban me and I'll make money from it. No, they played Iago for laughs, and it was like, what are you doing? He's supposed to be like the most sinister, calculated character of any Elizabethan drama, and you're like playing it like he's a sort of a clownish buffoon. He's not the rake, he's the bad guy.
But it's absurdly cultured, Stratford, as well. I was wandering around the following morning. We're kind of looking around. We're walking down by the river, and we sat out on the park bench, and we could hear in the background someone bellowing Shakespeare at the top, like you would hear someone in Liverpool going, "Oh, fuck off, mate!" But we would hear, light through one the window breaks. What? People yelling Shakespeare?
But they just pipe it out of speakers in the trees, just trying to. Oh God, it's really cultured around here. I really like it around here.
But I've got to wonder, if you actually live in Stratford, if you're kind of Stratford born and raised, would you be sick to the back teeth of shaking?
It's like Scousers hating the Beatles.
Yeah. It's worse than the Beatles around here. I mean, we get a lot of Beatles stuff around here.
But it's not everywhere.
It's worse in Stratford. Everything in Stratford is Shakespeare this, Shakespeare that.
Yeah, I think if you grew up in Stratford, you prefer Marlowe. Every time it's that classic kind of thing. Yeah. Shakespeare's just for the out-of-towners.
But I enjoyed Stratford. It was good. I saw Shakespeare's house, or at least where it used to be.
Yes. How big was it?
We couldn't tell. It was just a plot of land. It was like Shakespeare's house is here, but we don't know how many other houses they knocked down around it to say
I see. And also, I know it wasn't the smallest house in Britain, because I saw that yesterday.
Why you see smallest house in Britain? Me
and Nicola went to Conwy in Wales.
Oh, right, yes.
A little kind of knock around there. And we in there is Britain's smallest house, and they got a woman stood outside of it dressed as kind of like an old-fashioned Welsh wear.
Yes.
So she was dressed all in kind of Welsh gear, and she stood outside of what was a very narrow building, and it was very. It was 2 stories, but very small stories. Like I think I'd have struggled to get in, and you could probably touch both walls. I didn't go in because it was a massive queue, and I think it probably would have been a normal sized queue, but it just looked very big compared to the size of the house, and also the capacity wasn't that much. One would imagine from the size of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were very proud about having Britain's smallest house.
Still £500,000 if it was in London, though, wasn't
it? Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, ridiculous property prices in London. Alice, you've done anything fun?
I went to a farm.
Oh, a farm.
Over the last couple of years, I've been trying to visit like all the nice areas around Merseyside because I've lived here 8 years and I hadn't been to Formby or Crosby or any of the popular places. So I've been adding places to my list. And we went to Croxteth Hall. Turns out it's actually quite a decent attraction. Like they've got the big hall, the big manor house, and they've got gardens and stuff, and they've got some old walled gardens that they used to have. They used to grow fruit and vegetables in for the house and flowers for decorating the house and stuff. But they've also got a little farmyard where they've got lots and lots of rare animals in, like rare farmyard animals. So rare pigs and rare cows and rare sheep and things. But it was good. We got I bought a little box of food and then had to go back and buy another little box of food because there were so many animals that I wanted to feed. So we saw interesting pigs. Including this tiny little black pig that ran at you and wagged its little tail at you repeatedly, and some interesting sheep and goats that tried to steal everything off you.
You sent me photos of goats on stuff.
Yeah, there were lots of little baby sheep and goats. There was a little baby goat that had climbed. When we first saw it, it was rubbing its horns against the wall, and then it climbed up onto a little log, and then it kind of lost its balance and toppled off the log,
nice.
which was quite adorable.
Everyone likes goats falling over.
There was a cheeky little goat that kept getting out of its pen and just roaming around the farmyard and then climbing up on a bench and then jumping up onto a windowsill and standing on this sloped window ledge. Which was quite cute. Not interested in food, that one. It's the goats that were in the pen with it when it was in the pen were obsessed with food, but this one did not want to take any food off you. It was really, really good. I like farms, it turns out. It's a good farm because they've got lots and lots of different animals, so
Do they keep the cows behind bars so you wouldn't be too scared of them? Because I know you hate cows and you think that they're
I think cows can be aggressive, but they were all fine. They all wanted food.
Which might suggest that you were wrong.
So, yeah, cows can be very sweet.
I think they're aggressive, but weirdly, none of them were aggressive there, so that's strange.
They weren't protecting calves either. They're usually protecting calves, and they're usually like out in the fields, not being encountered by humans all the time, whereas these ones are like used to being fed by humans.
Think cows are pretty chill.
They had the very big ones that they had inside big cage things. I kept my distance from those a little bit. I let Warren feed them. But also, there was... they've got ridiculous tongues. So there was one that I did feed, and it like put its tongue on my hand, and it was kind of gross. Because I've got
how
really
can you
rough
feel
tongues.
think that's gross when your dog licks you on a constant basis?
I don't let him lick me.
Oh,
I don't let Lupin lick me at all.
Oh, he licks me.
I hate dog.
He licks everyone else.
I hate animals licking. I don't. He knows he's not allowed to lick me. Like,
would it matter if the tongue was completely dry, like a cat licking you?
You know, that's fine.
Because a cat lick, Kamiko loves to just sort of lick my hand at length. You
I
put your
don't
hand down,
mind
she'll come over, just lick it for ages.
Very, very small dogs that don't have like the jowly mouths and slobbery mouths, and cats are fine. But any other animals, I don't really like.
Could you tell Lupin that he's not allowed to lick me? Because
I do try. The
he
problem
does like
is
to lick the top of my stupid baldy head. Yes.
The problem is you look quite similar to Warren's stepdad, who lets him lick his head. So any guy that comes, most men anyway, but particularly men with bald heads, he will stand on their shoulders and lick the back of their heads because Warren's stepdad lets him do it. So he thinks that it's acceptable. So
it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. I don't like anyone licking the back of my head.
It's gross, and but I can't tell Warren's stepdad that he's not allowed to let Lupin lick his head.
Especially not when you go head to bollocks to head again. It's
Mike, I wouldn't let him lick your bollocks either if I was you. I'd have said ban all that.
He's not really a dog that licks himself there, so you don't have to. He licks his paws, but he doesn't lick himself anywhere else really. Okay. So you don't have to worry about that at least. But yeah, but. There were so two of my favourite animals at the farm were cows, in fact, because they had these two sweet little calves who were really delicate and really gentle and really affectionate and wanted food and stuff, and were lovely. So I did like some cows.
And you were reformed on the subject of cows.
Well, no, I still think that they are dangerous animals, but I didn't say they were like evil. Like, I said they were dangerous. Like,
these are beautiful little creatures that will grow up to be killers.
Ducks are evil because they're like categorically, like, they're rapists and they
just do their own thing. I mean, I don't condone it.
They have sex with dead ducks.
The dead duck doesn't care.
They rape other ducks.
Right, that's bad. But we can't impose our moral code on the animal kingdom any more than we should translate the animal kingdom's moral code to ours. Just because something is that way in nature doesn't mean that it's a good idea for people to live that way, which shouldn't be a controversial statement.
No, it shouldn't.
But it weirdly is amongst a weird section of atheists and skeptics who are enthralled by Canadian psychologists right now. Well, if the animals do it, then I guess we got to do it as well. But it's that, but said in like 10 times as many words, 3 times as many syllables, and half as much sense.
So a couple of episodes ago, we talked about Adam Conover and his recent coverage of the placebo effect for his TV series and podcast, Adam Ruins Everything.
Yes.
Oh, you're going to talk about placebo again? Because, like, apparently that stops people listening to the show.
Yeah, fuck them. On a recent episode of his podcast, Adam interviewed Catherine Hall, a molecular biologist attached to Harvard Medical School's program in placebo studies, where they discussed a paper which compared surgery, sham surgery, and no treatment for shoulder pain. Catherine Hall summarised the paper by saying, "It's not necessarily that the surgery doesn't work, it's that there is a broad spectrum of people who will benefit from the surgery or will be susceptible to the condition, and we're in that grey space trying to figure out what's what." Which I'm not actually sure what that means.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that there is a grey area. Well, it works or it doesn't. There's not yeah.
Adam followed that up with, "You can't definitively say, OMG, the placebo was just as powerful as this amazing surgery, or the surgery sucks ass and it's no good, or maybe these people didn't need surgery at all. You're in this nebulous zone where you're not sure which treatment is working better."
When I listened to that episode of Adam Ruins Everything, I kind of thought that really odd because she was talking about the paper and saying, like, we know that the surgery isn't that good, basically.
Yeah.
But then still using it to say that the placebo works.
Yes.
Which was really odd.
It is peculiar.
But you're even acknowledging that the surgery isn't very good, and yet not accepting that.
Yes.
You're still somehow using it as vindication of the placebo effect.
The paper itself, for what it's worth, interpret the same data as the findings question the value of this operation for these indications.
Yeah.
And describe the difference from no treatment as not clinically important. But that was only the beginning of a near hour-long conversation between Catherine Hall and Adam Conover, which touched on several aspects of placebo effect research. Now, I don't intend on taking on every single claim that they made in detail, partly because it'll piss off a lot of listeners.
Especially with your Scouse accent, Mike. It's about time you got rid of the...
But also because some of their conversation revolved around claims which you've already covered on the show. Although I was interested in this exchange on the history of the use of placebos in a clinical setting, where Catherine Hall claims that placebos used to be a commonplace intervention, but once we started using them in clinical trials, it became unethical to use them in clinical practice. Now, I'm not sure that I agree that the use of placebos in the control arms of clinical trials means it's unethical to use them in clinical practice.
Yeah.
The thing that makes them unethical to use in clinical practice is that they don't work.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't actually do anything. Not only that, there is a deception inherent in handing sick people fake pills and telling them it's medicine. In fairness to Catherine Hall, she does go on to say, you couldn't tell them they were getting a placebo, and if you can't tell them, then that's unethical as well.
Although there are people who put forward the thing that we've covered before, which is, well, placebos work even if you know it's a placebo.
When Adam says, is it really the case that placebos only work when you think the drug is real, she responds by saying, we've been conducting a series of studies in which you give a placebo and you're told you get a placebo, and we give you the information about the placebos. Placebos have been shown to help people. In the case of IBS, for instance, the placebo response rate is 42%. So that's very high. If I give you a placebo and tell you there's a 42% chance that you're going to benefit from this, that's the truth. And indeed, what we've seen is that people are having tremendous improvements from open-label placebos.
That's for IBS, a condition that fluctuates wildly.
Yes. And
when we rule out any pain medication that is less than 30% effective, so that's only 12% over. That's probably random variation.
We talked about this research on open-label placebos in detail on episode 206, actually.
How did you know it was in episode 206, Mike?
He's gone and checked, hasn't he?
I went back and looked at my show notes.
That's how it is. There you go, listeners. So if you ever want to know what we covered on shows in the past, because we get asked from time to time, what episode did you cover it on? All you need to do is have written the show and saved it in your own personal stash of codes and indexes.
Episode 206. On that show, we discussed Ted Kapchuk, who is Catherine Hall's boss.
Yeah.
And it is his program in placebo studies that's being run at Harvard Medical School. To briefly summarize, the data gathered in Kapchuk's IBS study was self-reported, obviously. The groups were not blinded, and the protocol involved telling patients that placebos will help their condition, which is as much of a misleading statement as telling them it's medicine, giving that A, discovering whether it was pills or deception was actually the point of the study. And so in order to tell people, oh, it's definitely the pills at the start of the study is rather circular. And B, it conflates the effect measured in the placebo arms of clinical trials with the effect of the placebos themselves. But for more information on that, go and listen to episode 206. That conversation continued with Catherine Hall claiming that placebos can do this or placebos can do that and so on, which Adam is lapping up. Adam is clearly having a whale of a time talking to Catherine Hall on that episode, which is fun to hear him enjoying himself so much having that conversation. That went right into this story, which represents a claim that we haven't actually talked about on the show before. This is one of my favourites, said Catherine. Cyclosporin is a drug which blocks the immune response. If you just had a transplant, you're treated with cyclosporin to suppress the inflammatory response. They did a study in which they conditioned the subject with cyclosporin plus, I think it was a pink drink, pink or purple. It was flavoured with saccharin. It was really striking. You took cyclosporin with this drink, which suppressed your immune response on day 1. Day 2, you took cyclosporin plus drink, it suppressed your immune response. Day 3, you had just drink, and that suppressed your immune response. Adam then says, so the pink drink has the same effect, even though it no longer has the drug in it? Right, says Catherine. So we're talking about a study in which the participants take a drink with a drug for 2 days, and on the third day you remove the drug, and the drink alone elicits the effect of the drug.
Okay.
First thing to note here, before we even look at this paper, is that this isn't about placebo effects.
No.
This is quite clearly a case of classical conditioning. Catherine Hall even calls it conditioning, where she says, we did a study where you condition people with cyclosporin.
Yeah, and if you were to make the distinction between classical conditioning and placebo effect, how would you draw that distinction for people who are used to them being thrown together in the same bucket?
And it's an interesting one because we've talked about the effects that we measure in the placebo arms of clinical trials, and we've talked about, say, well, they can be explained by biases and they can be explained by regressions and natural history. And one of the things that can explain the effects seen in the placebo arms of clinical trials is classical conditioning. It's your Pavlov's dogs response, your standard Pavlov's dogs response. You could say it is one of the placebo effects. But it's certainly not what people understand when you say the term the placebo effect.
Yeah, so Pavlov's dogs on the conditioning thing is you ring a bell and feed a dog, and you do that enough times that the dog will then salivate when you ring the bell. That's not because you're giving the dog placebo food by ringing the bell.
Yeah.
There's a structural thing going on. It's not a placebo thing in the sense that you're giving something that doesn't work and pretending that it does, or in place of something that does. You just, yeah.
So to the extent that you can argue that classical conditioning is an element of the placebo response in the sense that it may be partially responsible for part of the effect you see in clinical trials, and it's not even necessarily that we've deliberately condition people like that. It's just you go to the doctor, you get pills, you feel better, and you do that for your whole life. And then one time you get pills that do nothing, but you feel better anyway because of that conditioned response, because you've had that conditioning for your entire lifetime. It's not what people understand by the term placebo effect, which they think of as a kind of mind over matter, you will get better if you think you will, all that kind of stuff. And there is this distinction to be drawn between placebo effects and the effects measured in the placebo arms of clinical trials, because I don't think anyone would necessarily argue that regression is a placebo effect.
Yes.
Or that biased reporting is a placebo effect.
Yeah.
But those things are still measured in the placebo arms of clinical trials. It's a peculiar thing, but I think it's misleading to refer to this as the placebo effect.
That's true. Although even then, in classical conditioning, you'd imagine it would break down into at least two categories. One of which being the psychological conditioning, the other being the physiological conditioning. So I'm used to feeling like I got better after I take a pill, so I've taken a pill. I normally associate this with feeling better afterwards, so I'm going to look at things a bit differently. That's your psychological conditioning. And the every time I take a pill, it normally elicits the thing in the pill normally elicits this chemical response or this chemical reaction in my body, and therefore when I take a pill, the body assumes that's going to happen and sets up the biochemical response.
And there's limits to that as well, isn't there? So you couldn't be classically conditioned to start producing chemotherapy.
No, exactly.
You know, you could be classically conditioned to have a dopamine response because we produce dopamine. Normally, you could be classically conditioned to have a histamine response because we can produce histamine. You can't be classically conditioned to have a Herceptin response. Doesn't matter how many times you ring a bell and give somebody Herceptin, you can't further down the line ring a bell and just Herceptin springs from nowhere out of their brain's natural pharmacy, as the placebo effect
because
people like to talk about.
It's a synthetic chemical that we have designed.
But let's look at the paper itself. The paper was titled "Placebo Effects on the Immune Response in Humans: The Role of Learning and Expectation." It was published in PLOS ONE in 2012. This paper is broken down into 3 experiments, which they labelled A, B, and C. Why not?
No, fine. I have no problem with that.
Could have been D, E, and F, but you had a lot of people going, well, what happened to A, B, and C?
Yeah, that's true.
Which is true all the way through the alphabet until you get to experiment X, Y, and Z.
And then people are fine with it.
No one cares again.
Yes,
everyone's fine with it at that point.
Yeah.
Or even just X and Y. People are totally fine with X and Y, even if you miss off Z.
Yeah, it's fine. Even if it was just you'd done one experiment, we called it Experiment X. Yeah. Everyone's cool with that. It's not a problem.
That is true. Look at Wolverine. Oh, that's a terrible example, actually, but carry on.
So, for Experiment A, the researchers gathered 32 volunteers
Okay.
Spectacular numbers. 32 volunteers, all male, between the ages of 18 and 40. So shit numbers. They were randomized into two groups of 17 and 15. The first group was given a special green drink, not pink as Catherine Hall described it. Not that makes a huge difference. But they were given a special green drink.
I thought you were going to say the first group were given a blue pill, the second group were given a red pill, the second group developed more fedoras.
So they were given this special drink, which was made from dyed strawberry milk. And they flavoured it with lavender oil to give it a kind of funky, medicinal, distinctive taste.
Yeah.
Lavender.
You're taking something strawberry flavoured, made it green, and taste of lavender.
The green bit's fine. I'm not a problem with the green bit. You don't taste the green.
But they wanted a distinctive taste to be able to train that physiological response. And so the patients consumed this drink together with a dose of cyclosporin at 6 p.m. on day one of the test. They then had another drink with another dose of cyclosporin at 8 a.m. the following day. Then again at 6 p.m. Then again at 8 a.m. on day 3. And then they had their blood taken to test their immune function.
Okay.
Right? Having also had blood drawn at the start of the test in order to establish a baseline.
Yeah.
So they had a baseline, 4 doses of drink over 3 days. So drink and drugs, sex, partying.
Immune responses.
4 doses over 3 days. Nobody's had an inert intervention here. So far, everyone is getting the drug.
Okay.
And they didn't take any blood in between?
In between times. No, they didn't. No. So 5 days later, the participants returned.
Okay. Not on day 3 then?
Not on day 3.
On day 8.
5 days later, the participants returned. They were again given the drink, this time with sham pills. Fake pills with no cyclosporin in. Looked identical to cyclosporin, but it was just dummy pills.
And that's better experimental design to wait 5 days for the immune response to restore.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just weird not to describe it that way when you're describing the thing to someone. Yeah.
And they were given that in the same pattern as before. So when they came back after 5 days, they were given pills plus drink in the evening, then the next day, pills plus drink in the morning, then 6. In the evening. So the same pattern, 8 and 6. And then at the end of the 3rd day, blood was taken, having had blood taken at baseline, etc., etc., etc. So that's the first group. That's just the first group.
Okay.
Second group did exactly the same thing, except they had dummy pills all the way through. No cyclosporin at all. Second group didn't get any cyclosporin.
So the second group was just a test of how well they responded to lavender oil and
strawberry milk, yeah.
So far, it sounds like a well-designed experiment.
So that's experiment A. Experiment B was exactly the same protocol as experiment A, except there were only 19 volunteers this time rather than 32. So shit numbers before, shitter numbers now. And in experiment B, when the participants returned after 5 days, they were only given 1 drink and pills before the blood test. So not the 4 over 3 days challenge.
So no conditioning time.
No. It was just, here's the, one. They still did the 4 drinks over 3 days during the conditioning phase, but when they came back after the 5 days, just 1 drink.
No reconditioning.
Just 1 drink. Experiment C we'll come back to because that's actually very different to experiment A and B. So, first off, Catherine Hall's description of this study is quite inaccurate.
Yeah.
She had people taking a sweet pink drink with cyclosporin on day 1 and day 2, and then just the drink on day 3, and we continue to see an immune suppression. In fairness to Catherine, she's recalling this from memory during a podcast interview, but that doesn't actually accurately reflect what was going on in this study at all.
No, it's not ideal, yeah.
Participants actually came back after 5 days. It wasn't the case that come day 3 they suddenly stopped taking cyclosporin and retained the immunosuppression effect, which is probably just as well since the terminal half-life of cyclosporin in the human body ranges from 5 to 18 hours. So if you did the experiment the way Catherine described it, you'd expect everyone to be immune suppressed by day 3 from the cyclosporin they took on day 2.
Yeah.
But the interesting question here is, what were the results? At the end of day 3, participants from experiment A who were getting cyclosporin had a suppressed immune system compared to baseline, and the participants in the control group did not. So that means cyclosporin works. Marvellous. Well done.
That's what you need in your...
Yeah.
You need to reconfirm that in your...
You do. It could expose a flaw in your protocol if that didn't work. We're in trouble.
If you can't do that, then you can't test against cyclosporin. You need to prove in your individual experiment that it is definitely working.
Yeah.
But coming back after 5 days and repeating the protocol with inert pills, the control group had no significant change from baseline, but the participants who'd been through the conditioning also had a suppressed immune system, even though no drug had been taken the second time round.
Compared to the baseline. From that second baseline.
Yes. So participants who had drink plus cyclosporin at the start had the effect of cyclosporin from drink alone when they returned 5 days later. What about experiment B? Well, it turns out in experiment B, where the participants only received a single dose of drink when they came back on day 5, there was no effect there. In experiment B, there was no significant effect after that single stimulus. So even though they were conditioned with cyclosporin at the start, there was no effect when they were challenged with the drink later on.
Yes, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Based on that, it would be interesting if they'd taken blood on day 1, 2, and 3 throughout the initial conditioning and the experiment A.
Sure.
To see if there was a delay with the dummy pills compared to with the
I see what you mean, yes. To see if they had the same delayed effect and it took 2 or 3 drinks in order for that challenge to actually produce an effect, yeah. So what have we actually proved here? Well, as I say, it shows that cyclosporin works. It shows that humans are susceptible to classical conditioning, which we knew both of those things, and it shows very little else. It certainly says nothing about the placebo effect that I can see. Notably, I thought when describing this study for Adam Ruins Everything, Adam summarised this as the drink had the same effect even though it no longer had the drug in it, to which Catherine responded, right. But is that actually the case? In experiment A, when the participants returned after 5 days, it turned out that the level of suppression wasn't anywhere near that of the active drug. In the cyclosporin phase, the researchers measured a change of about 73% from baseline. When they came back and they were getting just drink with no drug, it was only a 30% change from baseline.
Right.
So they're less than half the effect size. Still an effect. Still a significant effect, but substantially reduced compared to the active treatment. And again, this is classical conditioning. This isn't a placebo effect.
Yeah. And you'd want, presumably, whatever cyclosporin. You'd want whatever cyclosporin was being given to you for. Presumably, you want the 74%, not the 30%, for whatever the reason you're getting cyclosporin.
I mean,
and also you don't want to ever rely on an effect where you have to condition with a drug first and then just
yeah.
Now, if you just took the drink without the conditioning phase, even if you were told it would suppress your immune system, you're not going to expect to see an immune response.
It always stayed at baseline, both in the initial conditioning stage and in the stage where they came back and were retreated with the dummy pills the whole way through.
And nothing in this paper indicates that you would expect to see an immune response without conditioning.
Yeah.
But that brings me on to experiment C. The same researchers in the same paper also did a third experiment, which they called experiment C. 33 male volunteers, again, all male, which isn't ideal, and again, small numbers, which isn't ideal. Very small in this case, in fact, because the 33 male volunteers were randomized into 4 groups.
Right.
Of 9, 8, 8, and 8.
Yeah.
The participants in the first group were presented with 4 boxes and told that one of those 4 had cyclosporin in it, which would suppress your immune system.
Yeah, one of the 4 had £50,000 in it. One of the 4 had a goat, and the last one had Gwyneth Paltrow's severed head.
They then had to go up and choose one of the 4 boxes and then take the cyclosporin that they received in that box, which might be a dummy cyclosporin, might be real cyclosporin. They had to take that 4 doses over 3 days, like we saw before, the 6 p.m., 8 a.m., 6 p.m., 8 a.m., and then bloods at either end of that.
Okay.
Right?
That's one of the groups.
That's one of the groups, yeah. So group 1 were told 1 in 4 boxes contained cyclosporin.
Yeah.
So you have a 25% chance of picking the box with the drugs in.
Right.
Group 2 were told that 2 of the 4 boxes contained cyclosporin. So you had a 50% chance of picking a box with the drugs in.
But the 25% chance could have been to a group of people with 8 people in there.
Yeah.
Which would have been 2 people.
If they chose perfectly randomly, it would have been,
Okay. Just to get what the numbers are actually doing here. Okay.
Group 3 were told that 3 of the 4 boxes contained cyclosporin, and they had a 75% chance of picking a box of drugs in. And Group 4 were told that here are 4 boxes of cyclosporin. Go and pick one.
Okay.
So there was a 100% chance you're definitely getting a box of cyclosporin. In fact, everyone was getting dummy pills.
Yeah.
There was no cyclosporin in any box. It was all you were told is there is cyclosporin in the box, and there never was any.
Right.
Each group had blood taken, and they wanted to see if just the expectation of getting an immune suppressant would invoke the immune suppression response.
Yeah.
So they said, this is cyclosporin. It causes immune suppression in people. That's what it does. So they set people up with that information and then had them choose one of the 4 boxes.
It's an interesting thing to study for placebo studies because people don't know what immune suppression feels like. You can't self-report on that because you don't. Most people wouldn't have experience of how that feels. And in fact, for the most part, it wouldn't feel like much apart from your blood counts might change, which can make you feel tired and stuff. But
that's true. But do you genuinely think that from all the placebo study we've now seen, they wouldn't be a study out there that would have a self-reported outcome? And how suppressed do you feel your immune response is on a scale of 1 to 10? I think it's pretty suppressed. Yeah.
Have you had a cold in the last week?
And I've been very careful to refer to the participants in this study as participants and not patients because they are all healthy volunteers.
Yes.
As is commonly the case in placebo effect research. They're using healthy volunteers. They're not actually using any patients.
Because we usually are very specific about the language we use and try to use language that reflects the data that we're talking about.
So everyone was getting inert pills. No cyclosporin is actually involved in experiment C, just the promise of cyclosporin. Each group had blood taken, and it was about seeing if the expectation of getting the immune suppressant would invoke immune suppression. So this isn't conditioning, this is just patient expectation. This is classic placebo effect territory. Tell a patient that a dummy pill is a painkiller, and it'll kill pain. Tell the patient that the same dummy pill is actually a dopamine agonist, and they'll have a dopamine response. Can you give a patient an inert pill and tell them it's an immune suppressant and have their immune system suppressed?
Right.
That's what we were trying to discover here.
Okay.
Turns out you can't.
No.
Fuck all reaction in any of the 4 groups. There was no significant suppression of the patient's immune systems in any of the 4 groups.
So placebo was fuck all.
Which is unsurprising because...
So it did absolutely naff all. Now, you may recall a similar study that we talked about on Parkinson's patients, which we talked about in episode 189, where patients were told that there was either a 25%, 50%, 75% or 100% chance that the pills they were being given were their real Parkinson's meds.
Yeah.
And of those, only the 75% group had a significant dopaminergic reaction to the inert pills.
But those were patients who already had Parkinson's disease and had already been conditioned to Parkinson's medications.
Yes. Now, at the time, I said that maybe this isn't all that surprising because it turns out the treatment for Parkinson's is dopamine agonists, and dopamine is part of the brain's natural reward pathway. So you might expect a dopamine reaction from grateful patients when you hand over their much-needed medication, having first withdrawn it for the purposes of a study.
Yeah.
And that dopamine response might be enough to have a small therapeutic effect in Parkinson's patients. What was a little odd is that this effect was observed only in the 75% group and not in the 100% group.
Yeah, where there was some jeopardy as to whether you were getting it or not. Yeah,
which the paper hand-waved away, saying, the dopaminergic system is expected to activate when the therapeutic benefit is likely but not certain, which sounds like bollocks to me.
Yeah, it does sound weird.
But what the fuck do I know? The cyclosporin paper, however, was specifically trying to replicate that likely but not certain scenario. They'd read that paper and said, "We're doing that.
We want to crack
thing,
that. Yeah,
but we're doing it with cyclosporin instead of with dopamine agonists." Specifically, the paper says that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. They cite the paper and say we're going to do this thing. But on this occasion, it didn't actually work. From the paper, it says, we did not observe an expectation-induced effect in any of the 4 probability groups, suggesting that peripheral immune functions cannot be affected through mere cognitive factors. Thus, it appears that scientific findings concerning the experimental conditions under which placebo responses occur cannot be generalized and easily transferred from one disease or system to another. To which I say, no shit.
They've stumbled across the right answer, but their logic is terrible there. They did a different experiment. One they're looking at placebo effect, and one they're looking at classical conditioning.
Well, so
the last one was placebo effect.
Experiment C was just expectation. That's true.
Experiment C was just expectation. It was just placebo effect, and they were doing it to reproduce a Parkinson's experiment, which was classical conditioning because the patients were already on Parkinson's medication.
Yes.
They were taken off Parkinson's medication and then told they were being given Parkinson's medication again.
That's true. Well, that Parkinson's one was talked about as being placebo, and that's maybe where the fudge has come in. Yeah.
but it's two entirely different experiments. They've stumbled across the right answer.
Yeah.
But
it's reasonable to think
they've failed
that
their logic there because those two experiments are not comparable.
The Parkinson's experiment, those patients have essentially been conditioned.
They've been conditioned by their own treatment.
By treatment to have a dopaminergic reaction when they're given their pills. Quite aside from the dopaminergic reaction they would be having because, shit, my pills, thank fuck for that.
Yeah.
You know? So quite aside from the argument that the only reason this might plausibly work for Parkinson's is that being nice to someone produces a dopamine response, placebo effects are also noisy, messy, and don't transfer well because they often represent a pattern of non-specific data unique to a condition, unique to those patients, unique to those researchers at that particular time, in that particular experiment, and so on and so forth. They are specific to the trial in which they are being measured. This is not the result of a specific intervention, no matter how much people like Ted Kapchuk and Catherine Hall try to make it so.
So Ireland is going to the polls in May. The exact date in May isn't determined yet, as far as I can tell. To repeal or not to repeal the Eighth Amendment, which is specifically the amendment which outlaws abortion. They're doing this via a referendum because if there's one thing the last couple of years have taught us, is that referenda are clearly the best way to make important decisions about how the country is run, and they cannot in any way lead to broad divisions in society and huge amounts of ill feeling, especially around incredibly important or emotive topics. But as I say, the Eighth Amendment is the one that currently outlaws abortion, making Ireland one of the few countries in Europe where abortion is illegal. And I was very surprised to see how few that was. Alice was doing the research with me on this. The list of countries or places where abortion is illegal in Europe runs to just Malta, San Marino, Liechtenstein, Andorra, and Vatican City, and Ireland. So of all of the others, they're technically like non-country territory type states, a small kind of
microstates.
Microstates,
according
exactly.
To Wikipedia.
According to Wikipedia, they are microstates, which means Ireland is the only official actual country in Europe where abortion is illegal.
Yeah.
The Eighth Amendment was introduced in 1983, which amended the personal rights section of the Irish Constitution to include clause 40.3.3, which states, the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and, with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable, by its laws, defend and vindicate that right. That was introduced in 1983.
Yes.
Prior to 83, abortion was already illegal under the Offences Against the Person Act of 1861 for UK and Ireland.
Which isn't coming under part of the referendum.
No, it's not.
So I wonder what happens with that act.
Well, my understanding, and it's a very flawed understanding, I think, is that I think technically in the UK there are still some restrictions technically on the books about abortion, but they are get-aroundable through very easy means, essentially.
So we have that act. I think we created that act, but it's been very, very heavily amended, whereas that section is still, or at least before the Eighth Amendment, was still being used to make abortion illegal.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that will be amended.
I'm not sure. I don't know about that. But I do know that since 1983, an estimated 170,000 women have left Ireland to go elsewhere to have a termination. And up to 2,000 women a year illegally take abortion pills that they've accessed online. They can access them online, but it's illegal to do so, and they are taking them. So repealing the Eighth Amendment will make abortion legal, and it will also therefore make it safer in a number of obvious cases, really. So being a referendum on a topic that people feel very strongly about, it's obviously been attracting a lot of attention, campaigning, and also a lot of propaganda, which brings me to want to talk about today, which is a leaflet that I saw, which were reasons to be pro-life against choice on this debate. And I've sent you the leaflet. I saw this knocking around Twitter. So you can actually see this leaflet by a pro-life, quote-unquote, or anti-abortion organisation. And the leaflet starts by saying, if you have already decided to vote in favour of legalising abortion, you should be able to answer each of the following questions with an unqualified yes. If you're pro-abortion, your yes to these answers, to these questions, has to be unqualified. There is no other way to be pro-abortion but to have an unqualified yes to these questions. So, number one, states, I am completely comfortable with the fact that Ireland may very shortly get into step with other jurisdictions where it is lawful to terminate, in inverted commas, an unborn child with Down syndrome right up to the time of birth. Yes or no, circle one of them. And it says underneath, Iceland boasts that it has solved the problem of Down syndrome. How? Simply by killing all unborn children with the condition. This is the statement you have to make an unqualified yes to.
Yeah.
Now, this is obviously incredibly flawed and propagandist. For one thing, it is not legal to terminate any children, any fetuses, any babies or anything, right up until the time of birth.
Yes.
Nobody's proposing that.
Yeah.
Nobody's proposing you get to 8 months, 29 days, go, right, now, I've decided 24 hours to go, you're coming out and you're dying. That is not what's on the books anywhere in the world. That is a straw man argument.
It's also perfectly reasonable to be largely in favour of the availability of abortion and say, but I don't think it should be used in cases of Down syndrome.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
That's a perfectly reasonable position to take.
So there is a very clearly a qualified answer to give here. I mean, so in the UK, the legal term limit on abortion is 24 weeks. In Iceland, it's first of all, they have a very low number of Down syndrome children born every year. They say 1 to 2 per year, and it is true that they do allow abortion of babies with medical issues or medical abortion of babies with issues like Down syndrome after 16 weeks. So not even the 24 weeks of the UK. But you're not allowed to do that just on request. There has to be a medical reason, although some of those medical reasons are get-aroundable in the sense that it could be for undue duress to the mother to go to term.
Well, so that's true of abortion in general in Iceland, up to 16 weeks. After 16 weeks, it's only for health problems
for
the baby.
But of course, the test that would tell you whether...
So in Iceland, you cannot have an abortion on request ever. The only way you can have abortions is for medical reasons or the reasons that are often given for why a person might have an abortion. So the mother was raped and the baby is a production of rape. There's low socioeconomic background status of the family, and that it would be challenging for the family to raise a child. Things like that, but it's never allowed in Iceland. You're not allowed to just say, I fancy an abortion, I want an abortion. It's not a decision that you make, it's a decision that is made between you and your medical providers of whether it is reasonable in your case.
Yeah. So that is the first straw man argument on here. The next one, I am completely comfortable with the termination of a child who, at 12 weeks gestation, is perfectly formed, has a beating heart, and who fights furiously in his mother's womb to prevent the surgeon from killing him. This can be seen on an ultrasound scanner. So again, this obviously isn't a valid argument. For the first thing, fully formed after 12 weeks. Well, no, a baby isn't fully formed after 12 weeks. They have organs, they have most of their bits in part, but they haven't got a proper skeleton at that point. It's still cartilage. And at 12 weeks, they are 2 inches long and they weigh half an ounce. So if you want to argue that a 2-inch long baby is fully formed, I think you've got to go somewhere to convince people.
And their brain isn't anywhere near developed.
No,
they've got all the organs, they're just not all fully
And also, what stood out for me in that thing was the use of male pronouns all the way through as well.
To describe the baby.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's only one male pronoun right at the very end.
The baby is clearly male, so I assume they've got no problem with the termination of female babies at 12 weeks.
But also, the language of this thing is just fascinating. I mean, first of all, fights furiously. Okay, so you can see in an ultrasound the fury of a 2-inch long fetus. You can see them fighting furiously.
Fairly sure you need a functioning brainstem to be furious.
I think you do.
I think you do.
At what age, what week's gestation do you think you develop the capacity for fury?
For fury.
I'm genuinely not sure.
I think even newborn babies aren't capable of fury, are they?
I think they're only capable of fury. But also, I mean, define fight. When it says fights to prevent the surgeon from killing him, well,
it's impossible.
It's nonsensical language, really. Is what we're saying here. And ultimately, at 12 weeks, that is not a viable baby. You couldn't take that baby out of a mother at 12 weeks and it survives. So it is not a fully formed baby by any stretch of imagination.
Only 50% survival rate at 24, 25 weeks.
Yeah,
which is twice as developed.
Yeah, and that's a long time for a baby. A week is a long time in the womb.
God, yeah.
In both politics and the womb is a week a long time. So number 3, you have to be able to say, I am completely comfortable with the fact that a jurisdiction which legalises the killing of one group of innocent people can just as easily use the same moral argument to kill another group of innocent people. such as defective, quote-unquote, newborns, the bedridden elderly, or the physically and mentally impaired. This is the argument they're making. They're literally making the slippery slope argument.
Yeah.
The argument being, if we kill a 2-inch long fetus that's incapable of surviving by itself, we can therefore kill a 60-year-old lady who's unable to leave her bed.
Even if you could argue the slippery slope argument, which is obviously a logical fallacy, there is a very clear distinction between a developing baby in the womb and human beings that are existing as independent, fully functioning human beings. Also,
I would say I probably am pretty comfortable with saying there should be a level of euthanasia available to people in certain situations. I'm also comfortable with that. That's
the point I was going to make.
I actually what frustrates me quite a lot about this is that all able-bodied adults have the right to kill themselves. Suicide hasn't been illegal in the UK for a surprisingly short amount of time, but for a while. And yet, if you're disabled and not able to end your own life, you are not allowed to make the choice to end your own life. That is illegal.
The little sort of sub-paragraph below that point actually says, younger adults who vote in favour of repeal may find that in 50 years from now, they're facing termination themselves because the total cost of their care in a nursing home exceeds a legal threshold. Now, nobody's arguing here that the decision to end a life should be based on a financial assessment form. That's not what's being proposed here. It's not like, so they're trying to make the case that if you vote no and you vote to keep the Eighth Amendment, you might be voting for someone to kill you in the future because they'll just use the same argument 50 years from now. Well, one would imagine if that was going to come in, there'd probably be a couple of other decisions to be made along the way, a couple of other referenda.
And they would ask I'm too emotive on this subject.
Well, that thing is, that's an important thing, is that the language of this is very clearly written in order to elicit maximum emotion from this, to prod the right soft spots that some people might fall through and say, well, actually, I don't think we should be able to kill elderly people. I don't think we should be able to kill physically and mentally impaired people. Well, nobody thinks you should be able to kill physically and mentally impaired people, but that's not the same as a fetus which has been gestating for 12 weeks. It's totally different. Number 4, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that many young mothers will grieve in silence for the rest of their lives over the son or daughter whose tiny life they terminated. Many women feel the full emotional impact of their tragic mistake when they give birth to their first child and realise that he or she was really their second child.
That's a totally invalid argument to ever use if you would not consider the use of abortion in a mother who is going to have severe mental health problems if they carry that baby to term. You can't then use the same argument that a mother will have mental health problems from the abortion if you wouldn't consider that as a valid argument in favour of abortion.
Not just mental health problems, physical health problems.
Yes.
So there are women whose first pregnancy might suffer complications that if they don't miscarry, they'll be left at best infertile in the future and at worst in severe, far more severe circumstances than that. So there are a not small number of people for whom it's not just, if they don't abort their quote-unquote first child, they won't have a second child. They won't be around to have a second child. So that's just a nonsense argument. Also, the idea that this is the argument from the silent victims. So they're saying you've got to be comfortable with the fact that many young women are totally silent about how much they're grieving about this. And the great way of making that argument, or the useful thing about making that argument, is you can point to all the silent people who back you up. So all those people over there who aren't saying anything, that's because they're evidence of my point. This is an argument from a lack of evidence. The silence is evidence of itself. It's not a coherent argument, really. So the next point that you have to be completely comfortable with, I'm completely comfortable with when a pregnant woman refers to her unborn child simply as a fetus because she plans to have an abortion. This highlights the stark moral contradiction in the pro-choice position, where the unborn whom one plans to keep is a child, but the unborn whom one plans to kill is a bundle of cells. Leave aside the awful grammar of the use of whom and one in there, but I don't think this isn't a coherent argument either. For one thing, a child is always a fetus until a child is born.
That's a technical scientific definition. Well, it's not always. It's embryo for a while, and then it's
that's
fetus.
true. That's true.
It's blastocyst early on.
Oh, there we go. They want to go straight from blastocyst to baby and skip the embryo.
What about the women who've had multiple traumatic miscarriages and are trying desperately hard not to get emotionally invested in a birth that may not continue past a certain stage, and that they want to kind of protect themselves emotionally as best that they can.
Yeah, exactly. There are situations like where what could seem like clinical language is just protecting yourself from an utterly heartbreaking, well, it's going to be a heartbreaking disappointment anyway, or a heartbreaking tragedy, but trying to reinforce or insulate yourself from that as much as emotionally possible. There are many reasons.
You don't get to police the language that people use to protect themselves, as long as that language is not offensive and distressing to anybody else.
Yeah, this is just a linguistic point.
Yeah.
They're saying abortions shouldn't be legal because some women will talk about babies using a different word to the one we like. This is not an argument. If anything, this is an argument in favour of having terminology around children, not around restricting access to abortions. You could say, well, so long as everybody says the word baby, this argument is pointless. Another one, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that if abortion is legalized, some of my own descendants, my own flesh and blood, will be terminated. You've got to be comfortable with that. Now, what I love about this is they're basically saying it's more important that one of your flesh and blood suffers than a stranger suffers.
Yeah.
And this is from the pro-life argument. Is that, well, any harm or anything that might happen to someone who's part of my family, that's a higher level of importance than someone else. I don't care whose flesh and blood it is. This is not a reason to restrict access to abortion.
How do they feel about descendants who just choose not to have kids, or God forbid, have a girl instead of a boy so that they can't pass on?
Yeah.
It's the same argument. It's like the argument for having a male heir so that you can pass on your titles and land and everything else. It's archaic.
Also, isn't it something like 50% of pregnancies spontaneously abort before the mother even realises that she's pregnant?
It's
so.
massive.
Some of your flesh and blood is not going to survive anyway,
because that's how.
Regardless,
I mean that's true. Although to steelman their position, they'll be saying, "Well, that's already something we can do nothing about. This is something we can do something about." But I still think for them that leaving aside any other arguments about abortion, these are supposed to be 11 independent points to make about abortion. One of these points is someone in your family might have an abortion. And if their point is that they are pro-life, they are saying, and that is more important than a stranger having an abortion for a point to make. And that point doesn't stand if you want to continue a pro-life side of things. Number 7, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that billionaire humanists and atheists, like George Soros and sundry others who despise the Bible, have helped to fund the pro-abortion lobby in Ireland. Now, a couple of things here. One, you can be completely uncomfortable with the financing of a referenda campaign, but be totally comfortable with abortions. You can say, I think abortions are a medical necessity. I think they're a right and a reproductive right. I don't like the way that the argument about this has been conducted in the public.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'm against the way that these referenda are financed. But I'm pro-abortion. So you don't have. So this has got nothing to do with abortion. This whole point.
And again, their argument is you have to vote no to the repeal of the 8th Amendment if you cannot say yes to every single one of these questions.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be comfortable saying yes to all these, and one of the things you have to be comfortable with is I'm happy with billionaire humanists and atheists funding the pro-abortion lobby. Now, even setting aside most of that, this is not an argument about abortion, this is an argument about campaign financing.
Yes.
And so you can be totally fine with abortion, but against undue campaign financing law. But let's dig back into that campaign financing. The Catholic Church are the strongest opposition to abortion in Ireland, and they're pretty much minted.
Yeah.
They have quite a lot of money, and they don't even need necessarily the money. They have the entrenched power and influence that the Catholic Church has had in Ireland for centuries. So there's all that.
Arguably, the reason why abortion is still illegal in Ireland, when for more or less the entirety of the rest of of Western culture, it has been legalized.
Yeah, and I'm no expert on Ireland, and I wouldn't want to be reductive enough to say this is just the Catholic Church, but it's inarguable that they have a huge hand in this. And I'll come to that a little bit later.
Oddly enough, the other place where women often struggle to get abortions is the United States, where there's also a very strong religious lobby.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
also a very strong religious lobby over there.
Also, the dropping in of George Soros. I mean, it just that seems incredible to me, because when did George Soros become the bogeyman? Like, had anybody heard of him? Well, he's the guy who is, if you listen to crazy people, i.e. like 51% of America, whatever it is, who are on this, he's the one who is funding the anti-gun lobby and funded the March for Our Lives. He is the one who's funding the Women's March against Trump. He's the one who's funding the entire Democratic campaign against Trump. He's the one who's funded the Remain campaign. He is apparently the figure who's putting his money behind. And
I'm quite pro George Soros at this point.
He sounds all right, doesn't he?
But he's a nice bloke.
He is the shorthand that gets used for the conspiracy against conservative agenda.
Okay.
You are George Soros, and I think it's not a total coincidence that George Soros is of Jewish descent. I don't think that's a total coincidence. I think that does dovetail in with a lot of the reason people pick him as a figurehead, but also that he is a billionaire. But I don't think I'd ever heard of him before he became the pin-up enemy of the conservative.
And presumably he's
agenda.
both an atheist and a humanist and hates the Bible.
I've no idea. I genuinely no idea. I've no idea. I mean, he may well be. I've heard so little about him that I don't know. But it's just, whenever you see the dropping of the name George Soros amongst all this kind of stuff, it's nodding towards, it's dog whistling towards conspiracism, and it just, I think that's kind of another nod towards that. I mean, we go even further in that direction, to be honest, on number 8. You have to be completely comfortable with the fact that most of the groups who lobbied for abortion in Ireland are atheists, radical feminists, Marxists, humanists, or pagans, at least one of which is a member of the government. By and large, these various categories support the morality of the New World Order, which utterly rejects traditional Christian values.
Whoa!
Wow.
Yeah, and they capitalise New World Order, so it's not like they're saying, there is the
New Order of the world.
They are talking about the New World Order,
the George Soros New World Order. Now, one of the things to point out about this, I'd say, is that in previous referenda, the Irish Council of Churches, who represent the main Protestant churches in Ireland, campaigned against the Eighth Amendment. They weren't the one; they were against that, and it was the Catholic Church who were pro the Eighth Amendment.
Yeah.
So to say, it's all atheists and radical feminists and Marxists and Protestants who are trying to get rid of it. So you can't just label all these, but also pagans. Although we throw pagans in there, prove they're pagans.
I don't think I've ever met a pagan.
I don't know that I've met a pagan who wasn't taking the piss. This is again just this big conspiracism of all the people who will tag on these things that are hateful to the people that they're targeting here. And those things that are hateful are atheists, radical feminists, Marxists, humanists. Again, Marxists. There's a lot of people who have no idea what Marxism is.
No.
I don't think I've ever met a Marxist, to be honest. But if you listen to several different podcasts, or if you read certain message boards... Suddenly a fashionable
insult, isn't it?
Yeah, if you read certain message boards, or indeed, at times, my Facebook wall, I'm apparently a Marxist, a leader of a Marxist group, and friends exclusively with Marxists from people who don't really understand what Marxism means either, and clearly don't understand what postmodernism is either.
I gather you also write papers on social science as well.
Apparently so.
Because you sometimes use flowery language on Twitter.
Yes, that's absolutely it.
And by flowery language, I mean speak. You talk like an educated human being.
Well, I talk. I'll use I'd say a degree level of diction at times.
Use the appropriate words to describe the things you're talking about.
Yeah, but if you are a right-wing conservative radio host who is annoyed with me criticising Jordan B. Peterson, then that means I must be a social scientist. No, it wasn't Jordan B. Peterson, it was Peter Boghossian. They all blend together, to be honest. Number 9, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that RTE, TV3, the Irish Times and the Irish Independent are intensely biased against the pro-life lobby and have repeatedly misrepresented their position and suppressed information that would reveal the true tragedy of abortion.
The pro-life lobby are misrepresenting their own position. Like, none of it makes sense, and they disagree with themselves. What's that word?
Contradict,
yeah.
They contradict themselves constantly.
I mean, they say here the tragedy concerns not just the children who are terminated, but the mothers who have been tricked into believing that by killing their unborn child, their lives will improve. Now that they can fuck off on that point. And one of the reasons they can fuck most off is that you see at the moment, there is not a small number of cases, especially if you look on the Repeal the 8th hashtag on Twitter, the cases put forward of women who medically needed an abortion, who were not allowed to have one in Ireland due to the law, and who suffered and even died as a result of being medically denied abortions that would have saved their lives.
Right.
Because the life of their child was put before their own life, even if the life of their child was not viable. And there are not a small number of these cases. So they can fuck off when they talk about mothers who've been tricked into believing that killing their unborn child would improve their lives, when there are mothers who have lost their lives because they were banned by people like this from terminating a pregnancy that was either not viable or was putting the health of the mother at risk. You have to be completely comfortable with the fact that the adoption of unwanted children was never given the least consideration by the government, the media, the pro-choice lobby, or vocal supporters of the Marxist/humanist agenda. The crass hypocrisy of the government position ought to be evident. For social and economic convenience, an unborn child will be killed. Thousands of prospective adoptive couples who would gladly give a loving home to the child, but our leaders would prefer if he or she were terminated. This is a sign of a sick society. So they're saying that you should not terminate abort children.
Every single woman is capable of carrying a baby to term and therefore must do so that she can give it up for adoption rather than...
And they're saying the government should have even considered all these children who are adopted could be... children who are aborted could otherwise be adopted. Now, there's a couple of things to point out here. One, we're assuming that the mothers of those children were able to go to term health-wise. Setting that aside, financially were able to support themselves through that pregnancy.
Through pregnancy without the baby being, or her own health being hindered in any way.
Yeah, and setting all that aside, there's currently 6,000 children in foster care in Ireland. I don't think we haven't seen any reports in Ireland of a lack of children to adopt.
Yeah,
we're not seeing a big lines of people at the adoption agency saying if only there were more children in Ireland to adopt. We have way too many parents and way too few children to give them to. That is not the situation we are in.
No, that's a huge problem across many countries.
Yeah. And the final one, I'm completely comfortable with the fact that both the Citizens' Assembly, which supposedly considered alternatives to abortion, and the Dáil Committee on Abortion, which was supposed to be impartial, were cynically designed to give the government the outcome that it wanted. They say only 3 out of the 25 witnesses heard by the committee were pro-life. Furthermore, the government's claim that the Citizens' Assembly was representative of the population as a whole is simply false. Now, looking first into the committee, which was, they convened witnesses to look at what they should do, whether they should repeal the 8th, whether it was worth having a referendum on them. They had 25 witnesses, apparently. You look at the list of witnesses. You had legal scholars on the legality of changing the constitution. You had human rights lawyers with experience working within the Human Rights and Equalities Commission. And bear in mind, Ireland is not leaving the EU, so they do have to work under the EU Human Rights Commission there. Even though I think that's a good thing, but for anybody who thinks the Human Rights Commission is a bad thing, legally Ireland is still under it. You had lecturers in medical law, reproductive rights experts, sexual health and crisis pregnancy representatives from the WHO, from the Department of Health. You had GPs, maternity care experts, psychiatrists, representatives from a rape crisis centre, representatives from a group called Terminations for Medical Reasons in Ireland, and also some obstetrics and gynecology medics, one of whom wrote the report on the death of Savita Halapanova, who was a lady who died after complication of a septic miscarriage at 17 weeks, whose death could have been avoided if she'd been given an abortion. Those were the lists of witnesses that were called to give expert opinion and expertise and advice to this commission. Then there were representatives from a group called One Day More, and from the Irish Family Planning Association, at least some of whom were anti-abortion. Now, not having experts on your side doesn't mean that you're discriminated against. To say that, well, why didn't you call more pro-life, more anti-abortion experts? Well, you can look at the list of experts that were called, and you can see why they were called to a commission that was analysing whether it was the right thing to do to end the ban on abortion. The fact that you don't have the experts or the science on your side doesn't mean you're being discriminated against and you can therefore cry foul. It might mean you're on the wrong side of things here, and that holds true. Alice, I think you looked at the Citizens' Assembly as well, didn't you?
The counter view is that the Citizens' Assembly is that group of people that don't have the expertise. So it's 99 people chosen to be brought. So 99 members are citizens entitled to vote at a referendum randomly selected so as to be broadly representative of Irish society. The representative criteria include gender, age, location and social class. There's 99 plus 99 substitutes, and they were selected not by the government or anybody with a vested interest in it, but by an opinion polling company, Red Sea, who won the tender and used the electoral register to select 99 people who were broadly representative of Irish society. They heard on this particular issue, they heard an awful lot of different opinions on the matter. So they had 13,000 submissions received from the public. They selected 17 submitting organisations to make presentations to the Assembly, which included Amnesty International, Atheist Ireland, Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment, Doctors for Choice, Doctors for Life, Every Life Counts, Family and Life, Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference, Irish Family Planning Association, Parents for Choice, Pro-Life Campaign, General Synod of the Church of Ireland, Iona Institute, National Women's Council of Ireland, Union of Students in Ireland, Women Hurt, Youth Defence. So people from every background, from either side of the argument, there were people who made presentations to the Assembly. And then on the 22nd of April, they had a vote of 88 people cast their votes, and they voted on a range of different things as to whether they thought that abortion should be allowed in certain circumstances, and then produced a report that they gave to the government.
So you can cry foul that report was not representative, but looking at the details of it, it looked like you're just sort of dismissing that because you didn't like its conclusions.
They've both got experts' opinions and the general public's opinions, and they've heard information from all sides of the argument, and they've just submitted a reports then to the government, who've then made a decision whether that they will have this referendum.
So that's just one of the leaflets that I've seen circulating about this. But it's astonished me that, this is saying, to be able to say, I think women should be able to have access to abortions, you have to say yes to every one of those.
Yeah.
It's loaded language, and it's false equivalence, and it's false dichotomies, and it's straw man arguments.
Even leaving aside the fact that, and on each of those individual arguments, it's like, well, that's misrepresenting the case, or that's not we don't think that that's actually how that works, or whatever. To say you must accept every one of these things if you vote yes in the referendum, that is not true.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the problem is that a lot of the language around the whole discussion is a debate rather than a discussion, and debates are not designed to get across all of the information as accurately and as correctly as possible. They are designed to win the debate. They use rhetoric and different types of arguments to try and win the debate, whereas a discussion around a topic is something that you're actually considering it from all angles. Using debate tactics is never going to give you a decision based on the evidence.
Yeah, debates are designed to be won rather than to find truth.
Exactly.
Or to find fairness, or to find the right way to be, or the right thing to do. So yeah, there's a lot of that floating around at the moment, and I sincerely hope it doesn't convince people that can be reached by this, who I sincerely hope that people are able to see through the bad rhetoric and the
Ireland
faulty
have
arguments.
made some good decisions lately.
They have, and
too late, but still they're making a step in the right direction.
So I'm hoping that Ireland managed to break the recent run of terrible referenda decisions and to come up with the right result in May.
So QED 2018, we have announced that tickets are going to be going on sale on the 1st of May.
1st of May.
At 6 p.m. That is 6 p.m. UK time, so that's 5 p.m. UTC. So if you would like to come along to QED, then you can go to qedcon.org on the 1st of May, and you can buy your QED tickets.
Yep.
Tickets will be £113, £75 if you are a student or if you are under 18.
That's true. It's QED this weekend, this year. It's 13th and 14th of October. But the 12th is going to be a free event, as we always do on the Friday of QED.
There'll probably be a fringe event on the Thursday night somewhere in Manchester as well.
That will be true.
Might be a couple of other events around that area too, so that's going to be fun. The big news, though, is that we've announced that the Skeptics Guide to the Universe is going to be appearing at QED this year.
That is very true. We've got the SGU.
We're going to have main stage talks from some of the rogues from Skeptics Guide. There's going to be a live recording of their show. We're also bringing George Hrab over with them as well. We've not seen George since QED 1.
That's true. We're getting George across,
So George is going to be coming over as well. So it'd be great to see George. I'm very interested to see what George thinks of QED. Because
he saw it right at the start.
He saw the very first QED, which I thought was, we did reasonably well at the first QED. And George said to us at the time, if you told me this was your 5th event, I'd have been impressed. Your first event, this is fucking absurd.
Yeah.
What
if he comes if you told me this is your 5th event, I'd be impressed. Your 8th event, no, not so much. Actually, not so much.
So I'll be interested in seeing what George thinks about, how far QED is moving along. Because obviously we've seen it kind of grow organically in that time of just a little bit. So it doesn't actually seem that much different to me. And I'd be interested to see what George thinks about, and Steve Novella as well.
Because he was the first one, of course. Yeah, Cara Santorino was obviously at QED a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We've also announced our MC.
Our MC is going to be Helen Arney.
Which should be very, very good.
Which would be good. We've been trying to book Helen for some time
to come to QED, so very happy with that.
So we're glad that we've managed to get her as MC. So Helen Arney is going to be coming along to MC at QED as well.
So that's all the good news about QED.
There's also a little bit of depends on your perspective, really, as to whether this is bad.
Depends how much you like QED, I guess, yeah.
So there's not going to be a QED in 2019.
No.
And we've decided that there's not going to be a QED in 2019, partly because we need some time off.
We definitely need a break.
And mostly because we need some time off. We just need
before we all go crazy.
Organising QED is relentless. And relentless for 8 years.
You start very soon after each one finishes.
Yeah. So there's not going to be a QED in 2019, but we will be back in 2020.
We will be back in 2020.
For QED Season 2.
So bear that in mind when it comes to October 2018. You've got to go 2 years from October 15th to the next year's QED.
Well, if you don't go to 2018, then there's going to be like a 3-year gap between the previous one and the next.
That's why you need to go to 2018, everyone.
It's the last QED of this decade.
It is the last QED.
This is going to be the last QED of the decade. QEDcon.org, you'll see information up there about everything that we've announced so far. We've got a few more things that we're going to be announcing over the coming weeks and months. We've got some exciting stuff that we've got planned, and it's going to be fun and interesting. But yes, come along to QED.
I'm doing Nottingham Skeptics in the pub next Tuesday. At the Canal House, I think the name of
it is.
On the 10th? On the 10th of April. So if people want to come along and see me give my cancer talk, then that's a good opportunity. It's right in the middle of the country, so well connected to places. Nice venue, nice people, good Skeptics group. If you've been meaning to go to Nottingham Skeptics and you listen to the show and you want to use that as a first chance to go,
come along to see Alice at Nottingham Skeptics. It'll be brilliant. Also, Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub, our social event is tonight in Dr. Duncan's. That's on St John's Lane in central Liverpool. So if you're in the Liverpool area, you should come along to that and say hello to us. Aside from that, then, I think that is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains then is we thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
All right, bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.